Hey, good afternoon. This is Nate. Nice to see you here again. If this is not the first time that you've been here. Going to do an investigation about Numbers chapter 15, 37 through 41. The tzit-tzit, or the tassels, who's to wear them, when to wear them, why we wear them, the importance of wearing them. We're going to go through some of the Hebrew in the text, and then we're going to go through the context of that portion of Scripture, and hopefully get to the bottom of is it just for men, is it just for Jews, that kind of thing. So let's see where we go with this. Okay, so I'm just going to read the text here, just the verses itself, and then we'll get into other things as we go. So in verse 37 of 15, it starts out again, meaning because of all that has just happened. Because of all that has just happened, Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel. Tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue thread in the tassels of the corners. And you shall have the tassel, that you may look upon it and remember all the commandments of Yahweh your Elohim, and do them. And that you may not follow the harlotry to which your own heart and your own eyes are inclined, and that you may remember and do all my commandments, and be holy, kadosh, or set apart, for your Elohim. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, or Egypt, to be your Elohim. I am Yahweh your Elohim." Okay, so that's 37 through 41. All right, some of the words that we want to be familiarized with. The word for children of Israel is B'nai Yisrael. Start over here and work your way this way. B'nai Yisrael. All right, so we can kind of figure out what that means. Now, B'nai could be just sons, and a lot of folks will tell you it just means only the men, or only the sons, or only the males. So my question is, and we'll get into more of the context here shortly. My question is, who came out of Egypt? Was it just the men? I don't know. It wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to raise up a nation with just men. Keep that in mind. All right, and did it include, when they came out of Egypt? Did that include foreigners and strangers among them? Because we know there was a mixed multitude that came out. Now, given there was probably a lot of them that really didn't want to have anything to do with Israel, other than we've been in captivity and we want out of here. We're following you guys. So maybe some were really interested in the God that they served after they saw all of that, but there's probably quite a few that weren't interested in that. Okay, so that's B'nai Yisrael. And of course the word tzit-tzit. It's only mentioned 3 times in Scripture. If you want more detail about that, and Deuteronomy 22, because some folks will say, well, doesn't Deuteronomy 22 have to do with tzit-tzit? I just posted another teaching that I did just prior to this one that has to do with Deuteronomy 22, verse 5 and verse 12. And you might find it interesting. I hope you find it interesting. Let me know, and we'll go from there. But that's the word for tzit-tzit, only found 3 times in Scripture. It is 6734 in your Strongs. Okay? And we have the word kanafeh, okay, where it says on the corners of your garment. Now that word can mean corners, but it doesn't have to mean corners. It is traditionally noted as corners, but it can also mean extremities, or edges, or wings. Okay, so the edges of your garments. Okay, so keep that in mind. So a lot of the way that everybody wears it now is basically on tradition, what we've seen from our brother Judah. Okay, Then we have the word bigdehem. This is the word for their garments. Once you put hem on the bottom, it kind of makes the word a plural. And it is Strong's 899. It's used 217 times in Scripture. The base word for it is beged. And the word is garment, clothing, raiment, robe of any kind, from the filthy clothing of the leper to the holy robes of the high priest, simplest covering of the poor to the costly garments worn by the rich and the noble. Okay? Those are those words. All right? All right. So, the other word is techelet. The word techelet, that's where we get the blue cord that's wrapped around. If you see brothers and sisters walking around with these tassels, that's where the blue cord comes from. It's also significant that the blue cord has to do with Mashiach or Messiah. These are our tassels. This is one that I wear. I have a little clasp here to hold it onto my pants. There is no tradition. There is no commandment for or against this. It is traditional, and some people may even get offended that I use a clasp to hold it there. Until I get something better or a better way to do it, that's the way I have it. If you got any suggestions, feel free to let me know. Okay. Let me get into some other words. Uritem, it's 7,200 in your Strongs. Ra'ah is a word, and that's to see, that you may look upon them. Okay? The other words that it could be is appear, become visible, become aware, displayed, distinguish, encountered, enjoy. That was one that kind of threw me up. Enjoy, gaze, make an inspection, see plainly, showed, surely seen, understand, and watch. Okay? Uzkartam. Okay? Uzkartam. 2142. Zakar is the root word, and that's to remember, and that's the most mentioned. It's used 232 times. Other words, other phrases that are used with it: ben mindful, boast, bring to remembrance, call to mind, confess, consider, extol, keep, take thought of. Let me ask you this question. Do women need reminding? Do children need reminding? Do men need reminding? We all need reminding. Okay. Mitzrayim, that's a word for Egypt. Okay. All right. I'm sorry, Mitzrayim. Let me read the word. Mitzvot. Mitzvot. All right. I saw the mitz and went to rhyme right after. Mitzvot. 181 times it's the word for commandment. Yes, I make mistakes. I'm human. Most common is obligation and terms. Obligation and terms. Okay. So there's a whole. I'm not going to go through all the Hebrew words here. I'm going to finish up with this one. Kedoshim. Okay. Kadosh is the root word. To be holy or set apart. I know coming out of Christianity just before I came out of there. Or the religious system of it, I always had that thought in my mind where it said, be holy even as I am holy. And I always thought, well, how do we do that? What does that even mean? Most folks who are still in Christianity can't tell you what that means. They can only give you this, to be like Messiah. Well, what does that mean? Okay? So, all right. So let me ask you some questions concerning these passages. All right, some of the questions that have come up, in discussion, I guess you could say, because there are teachers out there that will tell you only the men, okay, or only the Orthodox Jews or whatever. This for the men is primarily an Orthodox Jewish tradition. It is, if you go on the Chabad website, it will tell you tradition. This is a tradition that's been taken on by the Jewish culture, and women generally do not wear tzit-tzit, or do not in the Orthodox. That's not part of their regulation. My concern with that is that Yeshua confronted the Pharisees about elevating their traditions to commandment or even above commandment, and that's where they got in trouble. All right, so not all Jews view that women should not wear tzit-tzit. There are some in the Jewish culture that say that women should wear tzit-tzit. And if you want more of a Jewish perspective, or at least somebody from a Jewish culture explaining what happened with women wearing or not wearing tzit-tzit, there is on this on my page here a rabbi who gives a teaching on that, of where that whole concept of women not wearing tzit-tzit came from, because originally it was obligated that women wore tzit-tzit. Okay, so was it only men who left Egypt? Who are those who are to be holy? Is it only men or set apart? Who's supposed to keep the Shabbat? Who's supposed to keep the feast? Who's supposed to eat clean? Who's supposed to keep the commandments? Who's supposed to honor their father and their mother? That's just a very obvious everybody answer. How can we kind of segregate one commandment out of all the others and say that women are not obligated to keep them? There are in Scripture, when it does say B'nai Yisrael, that it deals directly with the men. But in the context of that chapter, it will specify in there for the men. And then there's other spots where it will say for the women. And then eventually it usually comes back around. And it's only been one or two times that I can recall. It brings it back around to B'nai, including everybody. Okay? So, keep that in mind. Those who don't wear tzitzits. Okay. This is just this is a no-brainer for me. Yeshua, our Messiah, who we are to become like in every aspect, to be transformed and conformed into his image, wore these tassels as commanded by our Father in Numbers chapter 15. Okay, who at that point in time, if you have the understand, if you've studied it, is our Father was actually Yeshua, the commandment giver in the Old Testament. For a good teaching on that, go and see Do You Know the Father and the Son? It's done by Rabbi Berkson, and I think it's 11 parts. He really builds a case for why Yeshua was actually the commandment and law giver at Mount Sinai. So our Messiah wore them. If he wasn't wearing them, the Pharisees and Sadducees would have ate him up during his day. He wouldn't even be mentioned because they would know him as a false prophet if he was not keeping the commandments. They were picking on him mostly for traditions that they were keeping, and that was the issue then. Okay? So we are to follow and be like Messiah. Some will say, well, I don't wear them because we know that the Pharisees got in trouble for them. Well, yeah, there's always going to be people who misrepresent what our master Yeshua was trying to convey to us on how to walk this out. That doesn't give us the right to negate the commandment. If our Messiah wore them, there has to be a way to properly wear them, not only physically on the outside, but up here as well. So, that's some that don't wear them. Do women or children need to wear them? Well, let me ask you this. Do women or children need reminding of the commandments, of how to observe Shabbat? And there's not a whole lot in there on how to, keep Shabbat, but it says to keep Shabbat. You shall rest from sundown Friday night to sundown Saturday night. What that word rest means, we start developing our own traditions. We're supposed to assemble and spend time in his time. It's his set apart time. I'm not going to get into all the details of Shabbat, but there are good teachings out there from other folks like Rabbi Berkson and Bill Cloud, Jim Staley. There's other folks out there. Need to do those folks need to guard the commands? It's obligated that women and the parents of children are to impress the commands upon their children. Well, what does that mean? We just tell them, yes, keep the Shabbat. How do you not teach them how do you not impress them upon your children without teaching them and also doing the commands in the right context? All right. Key word here is balance. Okay, balance. If we I have one person that I've met in this journey that gave me a good answer of why. Well, I don't even know if it's necessarily a good answer, but gave me an answer that was understandable of why he does not wear them. Now, I think it comes from the remez approach or the spiritual approach of why he doesn't wear them. But he's keeping the commandment according to that understanding. However, my question is, if we're to have balance, we know that our Father is looking for those who keep His commands in spirit and in truth. We need to have balance. I'm hoping that we can learn to grasp the spiritual without neglecting the prashat or the face value of the commandment. Okay? All right, so balance. So, now let's get into the next part. Context, context, context. All right, let's get it. This is where we get into the meat and potatoes of who this really applies to. All right? So let's back up to 15 verse 1. 15 verse 1. I gotta go the opposite. I have my Hebrew Bible here, so. All right. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you have come into the land. Who came into the land? Or who was going to go into the land? Who was promised to go into the land? Just the men? No. All right. So that's enough said there. All right. And then it goes through all that detail. And then it says in verse 16 of that same chapter, one law and one custom shall be for you and for the stranger who dwells with you. So, is that just for the men? Or, that just makes sense to me in that part. If it's even including the stranger, you would think it would include the women and children that are natural born as well. All right? Okay, so, and then in 17 it says, again, I say to you. So everything that happened just before this, this is why we're saying this. Say to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, when you come into the land, to which I bring you, then it will be, when you eat of the bread of the land, and you shall offer up a heave offering to Yahweh, you shall offer up a cake of the first of the ground meal. Both of these sections are family oriented. Hebraic culture is very family oriented. It may have been the men that brought the sacrifice to them, but the women were just as involved in preparing it and everything else. So, and the children. Children work right alongside the dad and mom. Okay? And then it talks about if you sin unintentionally. Is it only the men that sin unintentionally? Okay? I almost feel like I'm kicking a dead horse here, but I think we have to have the context. And then in verse 25, it says, so the priest shall make atonement for the whole congregation. Who's the whole congregation? It's not just the men. It's the whole congregation of the children of Israel. Okay? And it shall be forgiven them, for it was unintentional. So you're going to have to read the whole chapter here for yourself. This is the context. Okay? And then it tells about all of that, about sinning unintentionally, and then about in verse 29, you shall have one law for him who sins unintentionally, for him who is native born among the children of Israel, and for the stranger who dwells among them. But the person who does anything presumptuously or intentionally whether he is native born or stranger, that one brings reproach on Yahweh, and he shall be cut off from among his people. Okay? Because he has despised the word of Yahweh and has broken his commandment. Now, we have to be careful with his, or plural b'nai, or those types of pronouns, okay? Because in the Hebrew language, and if you're not familiar with Hebrew, but Spanish or something like that, anytime you have those words, you can have 100 women on one side in the group, and then there's one man in the group, and that pronoun is going to be masculine. It's going to be his or him or whatever. So make sure that you're keeping your context, because it will sound, especially if you're inclined to one direction or another, as some of our Jewish brothers are, to follow that tradition of Judaism. They're just all they're gonna see there as far as b'nai is men. Okay? All right, so intentionally, unintentionally, and then it goes right into, after reading off those commandments, think about it now, it goes right into, now while the children of Israel, that's all of them, were in the wilderness. It wasn't just the men in the wilderness, right? They found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moshe and Aharon and to all the congregation. Now those who found him may have just been men. It doesn't say. But I'm sure there was people out, probably families that were out on the countryside enjoying the Shabbat, eating a lunch, whatever. Okay? They put him under guard. And they, remember, they brought him to the whole congregation. They brought everybody out. All right? Who is the whole congregation? I know, I'm kicking a dead horse here. Because it had not been explained what should be done to him. Then Yahweh said to Moshe, the man must surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. So as Yahweh commanded Moshe, all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died. Again, now remember that word again there, because of all that has just happened. Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel. Now we're in verse 38. Tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue thread in the tassels of the corners. And we just read all that. Like I said, be careful with the word there and b'nai. If you're inclined that it's just men, that's all you're going to see there. But, as I said before, if you need to rewind, there can mean 100 men and one woman. It's still going to, or 100 women and one man, and it's still going to say men or sons. Okay, so that's inclusive of men, women, and children. Okay, all right. So now I'm not going to read through the tassels portion again because we already did that, just to save time. I'm going to go into verse 16 right after Yahweh gives a commandment to put these tassels on everybody in Israel, just so that he doesn't want to see us dying because we were just, and that guy was doing stuff intentionally. It might have been nice for him to have a reminder, I don't know if I want to cross this Yahweh guy, because it doesn't end well. Remind me to look back at Egypt and go, oh, I'm good. He said not to work on Shabbat. I'm not working on Shabbat. All right, so let's go to verse 16. Right after the tassels. Now Korach, go right into Korach, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, took men, and they rose up before Moshe with some of the children of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, representatives of the congregation, men of renown. They gathered together against Moshe and Aharon and said to them, you take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and Yahweh is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of Yahweh? So there's a half-truth there. If we're doing what Yahweh commands us to do, yeah, being holy is not that hard, being set apart. It doesn't mean just having tassels and doing the the mechanics of the commandments, but having the right attitude and the right heart of doing those commandments. Being set apart in spirit and in truth. And this guy Korach is going to rise up. I'm wondering if that was his last straw. That Moshe, you're making up stuff just to kind of keep something, keep us under thumb or whatever, control us. I think there's enough context there, if you read through that strongly clarifies that women, children, and the men are to wear tzit-tzit. Some folks will say that, well, isn't my husband my covering? That is a Christian concept coming from the Catholic, the Pope. I don't like to use the J name, but I'm going to hear Jesus did it all for us. Therefore, we don't have to keep the commandments. And that is a bad way to be. We know, as we've studied, that the commandments are for all of our generations, and that we are to become like Messiah. So that whole thing is a Christian concept. My husband is my covering. If that is the case, and you're only not wearing tzit-tzit, if your husband is if you really believe that, then women should not be keeping Shabbat. They should not be keeping the feast. Shouldn't have to do any of those things, because as long as their husband is doing it according to that thought process, they're exempt. So how can you be that way for one commandment and not that way for the rest? That seems like hypocrisy, which is what? The leaven of the Pharisees. All right, so keep that in mind. Our family has worn them since we started, and sometimes people don't know why they're wearing them, or maybe they're even wearing them for the wrong reasons. But that's between them and Abba. We shouldn't discourage them, but maybe encourage them. And the rabbi that's doing the teaching on here about why women are not obligated to wear tzitzits on the YouTube channel that I have, he will go into further detail about fulfilling a mitzvot or commandment unintentionally, intentionally, or even with the wrong reasons is never wrong. That's between them and Yahweh. So I hope this was quick enough for you. I kind of ran right through it and got to the point. If you want to know more, how does Deuteronomy 22 fit with it? There's a teaching on here with that. You can go to that. And then there's also an even more brief overview of both this teaching and the Deuteronomy 22 teaching. It says tzit-tzit in it somewhere. So my intent is not to make you feel guilty. Hopefully it provokes you to thought, and I'm not trying to be confrontational. This is just what it says. And what you do with this information is completely between you and Yahweh. Whether you wear tzitzits or not, I am not the tzitzit police. Show yourself friendly and we'll be friendly. And we don't judge people for not wearing tzitzits. I got friends who have worn them for a long time. I have friends who don't wear them. That's not going to hinder my walk or my children's walk. My children have a good understanding of it. My wife has a good understanding of it. So each one of us is accountable for our own walk. And we can respect where you are at. And we hope that you would respect where we're at. So shalom to you. And I hope this teaching has blessed you. Shalom.